The hard truth is this. You really only get one prime window to build real wealth, about 15 years, from ages 23 to 38. If you're serious about security, those are the years to push without excuses. People like to say things get easier around 30 or later. But if the focus in your 20s and early 30s is on fun, endless freedom, living for the moment, the reality is brutal. You're setting up a lifetime of struggle. The more you chase short-term highs now, the heavier the pain hits later. Hit 35 with no real assets, just stories of freedom. And guess who ends up paying the price? Your parents. Recent numbers show it clearly. As of late 2025, Empower Data puts the average net worth in the 20s at around $127,000. In the 30s, just over $321,000. That's not building serious stability. Deloitte's latest survey, nearly half of Gen Z and millennials say they flat out don't feel financially secure. When parents get sick, and when they will, the day comes fast. Nursing home care alone runs over $114,000 a year for a semi-private room nationwide. Often more. Suddenly, you're not just broke, you're powerless to help. They need you to step up, but everything's already too late. Body slowing, options gone, future trapped in poverty, resentment, regret, while your mind and body are still at their peak. That's the time to grind and build a rock-solid foundation. No delays. Welcome to the channel, where uncomfortable truths are quietly examined. If this is already landing heavy, stay with it. The rest of this episode gets even more real. And it's probably exactly what needs to be heard right now. A lot of young Americans are living like youth is an endless stretch of freedom. No real limits. Travel whenever the mood hits. Chase the fun. Spend without much thought. Fill feeds with adventures. Late nights, and that whole live your best life vibe. But here's the harsh reality that needs to be said straight. That way of thinking is dangerous. It's quietly setting up a future that's going to hit hard. The data backs it up. As of late 2025, from sources like Empower, the average net worth for people in their 20s sits around $127,000. In their 30s, it's just over $321,000. That's not stacking real wealth. That's barely enough to cover emergencies or feel any real security. And Deloitte's 2025 survey on Gen Z and millennials, nearly half, 48% of Gen Z and 46% of millennials, say they don't feel financially secure at all. That's a big jump from last year. Many are living paycheck to paycheck. Stressed over basics, no solid buffer. Take the typical story. Someone in their 20s jumps from job to job, parties hard on weekends, piles up debt for trips, gadgets, experiences. Because you only live once, they figure freedom means no heavy responsibilities. No need to grind too intensely. Then, a decade later, they're looking at the same thin bank account, watching peers who pushed early pull way ahead, with homes, investments, and actual stability. They're not free anymore. They're stuck, regretting every dollar wasted on short-lived highs. The small but brutal lesson here? Unlimited freedom without real discipline isn't freedom. It's just pain postponed. You're swapping temporary thrills for long-term regret. And the worst of it? That regret doesn't stay contained. It spills over onto the people who sacrifice the most for you. But more on that in a moment. Next, let's get into how the freedom you're chasing today turns into the heaviest burden your parents will ever carry tomorrow. Here's the thing no one wants to hear but needs to. Is that freedom a lot of young Americans are chasing right now? The kind where you skip building real security, blow money on experiences, and avoid the hard grind. It doesn't just vanish when life gets serious, so it turns into a massive burden. And the people who end up carrying it? Your parents. The ones who sacrificed everything to give you a shot. Look at what's already happening across the country. Recent surveys show about 18% of adults aged 25 to 34 still live in their parents' home. That's millions delaying full independence because finances aren't there. And when parents hit their later years, the real costs kick in. Nursing home care. The median for a semi-private room runs around $9,500 to $11,000 a month in late 2025, depending on the source and state. That's over $114,000 a year. Private rooms push closer to $131,000. Most families can't cover that without draining savings, selling the house, or going broke. Imagine the scenario that's playing out for too many. Someone in their 30s or 40s has no solid savings, unstable income, and maybe debt from those free years. Then a parent gets sick, needs care, meds, facility. Suddenly, the adult child can't step up financially. Parents watch their retirement evaporate. Or worse, go without proper care because no one can afford it. The exhaustion in their eyes. The quiet resentment. The helplessness. All because the freedom earlier came at their expense. The harsh lesson? Your choices today don't just affect you, and they directly load weight onto the people who already gave you everything. Delay building security and you're forcing them to pay the price later, often when they're least able to handle it. But this ties into something deeper about what real responsibility looks like. Next, we'll break down why true manhood, or just being a decent adult, means protecting your family, not draining them dry. Let's get real about what manhood actually means in the real world. A lot of people talk about fancy suits, job titles, or looking successful on the outside. But that's not it. True manhood, or just being a solid, decent adult, comes down to one thing: the ability to protect and provide for the people who depend on you, not drain them, not becoming the reason they're struggling. Parents don't raise kids expecting them to get rich or famous. They just want you to stand on your own. Yet when life hits hard, too many end up pulling resources from the very people who sacrificed to get them started. I've seen it firsthand, and the numbers show it's widespread. Think about the average guy who spent years chasing short-term freedom. No real savings built, unstable work. Then a family emergency hits. A parent needs ongoing care. Current estimates put the median annual cost for a semi-private nursing home room at around $111,000 to $115,000. Private rooms push $130,000 or more. Most middle-class families can't absorb that without wiping out retirement funds or going into debt. The child who isn't financially positioned, they can't contribute meaningfully. Sometimes they even add to the burden, still needing help themselves. The quiet looks of exhaustion. The unspoken disappointment. That's not protection, that's the opposite. The small but painful lesson. Real dignity as an adult isn't in how independent you feel in your 20s. It's in whether, when a crisis comes, you can shield your family instead of becoming another weight they carry. Fail at that, and no amount of excuses changes the reality. This all points to why your prime years matter so much. Next, let's look at the brutal facts about the real window you have, ages 23 to 38, and why the data shows it's truly make or break for most Americans. Here's the brutal reality about the window where real building happens. Most people in their 20s and early 30s act like time is unlimited. But the truth is, there's one prime period to create lasting security. It's roughly ages 23 to 38. That's about 15 years. In those years, energy was high, recovery is fast. The brain absorbs new skills quickly. Risk feels manageable. The world is more open to giving chances. Miss grinding hard then, and the doors start closing quietly. The latest numbers from sources like Empower show it clearly. As of late 2025, the average net worth for Americans in their 20s is around $127,000. By their 30s, it's about $322,000. That's not massive wealth. That's just starting to feel somewhat stable for many. Deloitte's 2025 survey on Gen Z and millennials, nearly half, 48% of Gen Z and 46% of millennials, say they flat out do not feel financially secure. That's a sharp rise from recent years. Many are stressed, living close to the edge. Look at real examples. Someone who pushes during those prime years learns high-value skills, saves aggressively, and invests early. By their late 30s, they often have solid assets, options, and a buffer. Compare that to the average person who drifts, prioritizes fun, avoids the intense push. By 38 or 40, they're often still scraping, watching others pull ahead. The energy to work long hours or bounce from setbacks. It's not the same anymore. The small but unforgiving lesson. Those 15 years aren't long. They're the one shot where effort compounds fastest and opportunities are widest. Waste them, and catching up gets exponentially harder. This leads straight into why starting late creates disadvantages that stick. Next, let's examine what life looks like after 38, and why the gap with younger competitors becomes permanent for most. Here's the reality about what happens when that prime window closes. A lot of people convince themselves they can always start later. That 38 or 40 isn't too old to turn things around. But the data and real stories show something different. Starting late puts most Americans at a disadvantage that's hard, often impossible, to fully overcome. By the late 30s and into the 40s, energy isn't the same. Recovery from long hours or setbacks takes longer. Family responsibilities pile up. Kids, aging parents, mortgages, the margin for trial and error shrinks. Look at the latest numbers from Empower as of late 2025. Average net worth in the 40s jumps to around $771,000. That's more than double the 30s figure. But for those who didn't build early, many stay stuck closer to lower levels, living with higher stress. Deloitte's 2025 survey highlights it too. Nearly half of millennials and Gen Z report deep financial insecurity. And studies on successful entrepreneurs? The average age for founders of the fastest-growing startups is 45. A 50-year-old founder is twice as likely to build a massive success as a 30-year-old. But that's the ones who make it big after grinding for years. The average person starting from scratch at 38, they're competing against hungrier, faster, less burdened 20-somethings and 30-somethings, cheaper to hire, more adaptable, fewer obligations, opportunities dry up, networks favor the early builders. The small but harsh lesson? After 38, starting over isn't the same game. The playing field tilts permanently against late starters for most. The gap widens over time. This feeds directly into one of the biggest traps out there. Next, we'll unpack the myth of late bloomers and why it keeps so many Americans chained to regret instead of action. Here's one of the biggest traps that keeps so many Americans stuck in procrastination. The idea that late bloomers are common, that real success often comes later in life. People point to a few famous names as proof that waiting pays off. But the harsh truth, for the vast majority, that's a dangerous myth. It excuses delay instead of demanding action now. The data tells a different story. Studies going back years, and still holding in recent analyses as of late 2025, show that the average age of founders for the fastest-growing startups The top 0.1% in growth is around 45. That's not late in the sense of starting from zero. Those people spent decades grinding, building skills, networks, and experience first. The outliers everyone loves to quote, the rare cases of massive success starting truly late, they're exceptions, not the rule. Think of the handful often mentioned, Colonel Sanders franchising KFC in his 60s, or a few others in non-tech fields. But in reality, those stories are tiny fractions, far less than 1% of actual successes. Most people who delay don't suddenly bloom. They stay average, or worse, regretting the lost compound time. The average American who puts off building security ends up with thin savings, higher stress, and fewer options later. No dramatic turnaround, just quiet regret, the small but unforgiving lesson. Clinging to the late bloomer hope is often just a polite way to avoid hard work today. Real breakthroughs come from consistent effort early, when advantages are biggest. This connects directly to one of the most common pitfalls out there. Next, let's look at the trap of blindly following passion versus grinding on real marketable skills, and the mistakes so many young Americans make falling into it. Here's one of the most common and costly traps young Americans fall into today. The idea that you should blindly follow your passion, chase what feels exciting or meaningful right now, instead of building real marketable skills that pay and provide security. A lot of people in their 20s hear the advice, then do what you love and the money will follow. They quit stable paths for creative pursuits, side hustles that feel fulfilling, or low-paying dream jobs. But the reality is harsh. Passion alone doesn't pay bills, cover emergencies, or build the foundation needed for long-term options. Recent surveys highlight how widespread this issue is. Deloitte's 2025 Gen Z and Millennial survey shows nearly half, 48% of Gen Zs and 46% of Millennials, do not feel financially secure at all. That's a big increase from recent years. Many live paycheck to paycheck, stressed about basics. Older data points to low passion in work overall. But the point stands. Chasing pure passion often leads to underpaid or unstable roles. Take common examples. The average person who majors in a passion field like arts or humanities without backup skills. They graduate into jobs paying far less than STEM or trade fields. Or the freelancer chasing creative work, inconsistent income, no benefits, burning through savings during dry spells. Years later, they're stuck with thin resumes, gaps, and regret when family needs arise. Compare that to those who prioritize high-demand skills early. Tech, trades, sales, finance. They build security faster, then pivot to more meaningful work if desired. The small but critical lesson? Passion is great as a bonus. But marketable skills are the real engine for security and freedom. Without them, following your heart often becomes a path to stress and limited choices. This ties right into the core of what real dignity requires. Next, let's break down why money isn't everything, but it's the true foundation that lets you maintain dignity and a strong financial mindset in the face of life's realities. Here's the reality about money that a lot of people try to downplay. Society loves to repeat that money can't buy happiness. That chasing it corrupts character. That living for it makes someone shallow. But that's often just a comforting story told by those who don't have enough. The harsh truth? Money isn't the enemy of dignity. It's the foundation that protects it. Without a solid financial base, even the best intentions erode under pressure. Recent figures drive this home. Deloitte's 2025 survey shows nearly half of Gen Z, 48%, and 46% of millennials do not feel financially secure. Many live paycheck to paycheck. When basics are a constant worry, choices narrow. You can't afford to say no to bad jobs. Can't walk away from toxic situations. Can't fully help family without scraping bottom. Take the common case. Someone earns decently but spends without control, luxury items, constant outings, keeping up appearances. Then a parent needs long-term care. Median costs for a semi-private nursing home room now run around $9,500 to $11,000 a month, over $114,000 a year. Private rooms push higher, toward $130,000 without savings or a buffer. Options vanish. Borrow, beg, settle for less care. Or watch dignity slip away in quiet compromises. The small but painful lesson. A strong financial mindset, knowing how to earn, keep, and grow money, isn't greed. It's the shield that lets you stay principled when life tests you. It gives the power to be generous without resentment, to stand firm without bending. This explains why real freedom isn't possible without it. Next, we'll explore why true freedom only arrives after a solid foundation is in place, and what happens when people chase it the other way around. Here's the harsh truth about freedom that too many Americans get backwards. A lot of young people chase the idea of total freedom early, quit jobs, travel endlessly, avoid commitments, live off a minimal income because life is short. They figure they can always build stability later. But real freedom, the kind that lasts, that gives real choices, only comes after a solid foundation is built. Without money in the bank, skills that pay, and a buffer against emergencies. Freedom is just an illusion that crumbles when reality hits. The numbers show how common this reversal is. Deloitte's 2025 survey finds that nearly half of Gen Z, 48%, and millennials, 46%, do not feel financially secure. Many live paycheck to paycheck. When no foundation exists, options shrink fast. Take the typical path. Someone spends years free, backpacking, gig work, no savings plan. They feel liberated at first. Then a parent needs care. Current median costs for a semi-private nursing home room run around $9,500 to $11,000 a month, over $114,000 a year. Private rooms push higher, often toward $130,000. Without assets built early, they can't help much. Suddenly, that early freedom means watching families struggle or becoming dependent themselves. True freedom looks different. The ability to say yes to opportunities, no to bad situations, and step up when loved ones need it, all without panic. The small but crucial lesson? Freedom without a foundation is fragile and temporary. Build the base first. Security, skills, savings, and real freedom follows. It doesn't trap you. It opens doors. And that leaves one final reality to face. Next, we'll wrap this up with why there are no more excuses left, and what taking full responsibility for the future actually demands right now. Here's the bottom line after everything we've covered. No more excuses. The patterns are clear across millions of Americans. Deloitte's 2025 survey shows nearly half, 48% of Gen Z and 46% of millennials, do not feel financially secure. That's a sharp increase in just 1 year. Empower's latest data as of late 2025 puts average net worth in the 20s at around $127,000, in the 30s at $322,000. For many, that's not enough buffer when real crises hit. And those crises come: parents aging, health issues, unexpected costs. Nursing home care alone averages over $111,000 a year for a semi-private room nationwide. Private rooms push higher, A lot of people reach their 30s or 40s realizing the freedom they chased left them exposed. No foundation, no options. Just regret and added pressure on the family. The small but final lesson. You, and only you, own the responsibility for what's next. No one else will build it. No society owes a rescue. No late miracle waits for most. Start taking control now. Build the skills. Cut the waste. Stack the security. It's harsh, but it's the only path that actually works. If this hit hard and you want more uncomfortable truths like this, plus a deeper look at why so many build wealth only to lose it all and end up broke again, check out the video Why Can't We Keep Money? So many people had it all, then lost everything and ended up broke again. Right after this, it's the perfect follow-up. And if today's message resonated, do me a solid, hit like if it made you think. Share it with someone who needs the wake-up. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. These truths aren't easy, but they're the ones that change trajectories. Thanks for sticking through this one. See you next.